What if the voice you've been waiting for was never meant to interrupt your life, but to gently move within it? What if God never raised his volume because he was inviting you closer instead? And what if the moments you dismissed as just thoughts were actually sacred nudges you didn't yet have language for? There is a quiet ache many people carry and rarely name. It lives beneath prayers that feel unanswered, beneath nights where silence feels heavier than noise, beneath the wondering, why does God feel distant when I need him most? You try to listen, you try to believe, yet your mind feels crowded with worries, questions, half-formed fears. And somewhere in that inner noise, hope and doubt wrestle without words. Maybe you felt it too. That tension between longing to hear God and fearing that you might be listening to nothing at all. So you stay alert for something unmistakable, something loud, something dramatic, something that would finally prove he is speaking. But instead, there is only quiet. And yet, what if this quiet is not emptiness? What if it's an invitation? Not to strain harder, not to search farther, but to remain still just a moment longer. Stay here. Don't rush past this silence yet, because what feels like absence may be the very place God begins to speak. There is a particular kind of confusion that settles in when faith feels quiet. Not loud doubt, not rebellion, just a soft, exhausting uncertainty. You pray, but your circumstances don't immediately shift. You ask for direction, but your mind answers back with questions instead. You search your heart for reassurance, and all you hear is the echo of your own thoughts. And that's when the tension deepens. You start wondering if you're doing something wrong, if you're not spiritual enough, if you've missed something everyone else seems to hear so clearly. You want God's guidance, but all you notice is the constant chatter of worry, memory, fear, responsibility. Thoughts collide. Emotions blur. And in the middle of it all, you quietly ask yourself something you may never say out loud. If God is speaking, why does it feel like I can't tell the difference? That question carries weight, because it doesn't come from pride. It comes from longing, from wanting to trust, but not wanting to deceive yourself, from wanting to follow, but fearing you might follow the wrong voice, from wanting peace, but feeling trapped inside your own head. And maybe what hurts most is this: you don't feel angry at God. You feel unsure of yourself, unsure whether your thoughts are just thoughts, unsure whether that nudge meant anything, unsure whether silence means waiting or being overlooked. So you keep going, functioning, believing in theory. But somewhere inside, there's a quiet sense of disconnection you can't quite explain. If that's where you are, let this be said gently. There is nothing broken about you, nothing deficient, nothing spiritually wrong. This tension you feel, this uncertainty, is not proof that God is far. It may be proof that something deeper is about to be understood. What if the struggle isn't that God is silent, but that his voice has been closer than you were taught to expect? What if the problem was never distance, but familiarity? Because when something blends seamlessly into the rhythm of your inner world, it's easy to overlook its origin. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention. It simply appears, quiet, subtle, almost ordinary. And that's where confusion begins. You were taught to look outside yourself for confirmation, for signs, for moments that feel undeniably supernatural. So when guidance arrives without spectacle, you hesitate to trust it. But what if God, in His wisdom, chose a gentler way? A way that doesn't overwhelm, a way that doesn't compete with fear, a way that doesn't bypass your humanity, but moves within it. What if the thoughts that brought unexpected peace, the moments of clarity that arrived without effort, the inner restraint that stopped you just in time, were never random? What if silence was never absence, but a doorway into a deeper form of listening? This is not about learning to hear more noise. It's about learning to recognize presence. And once that realization begins to form, everything shifts. Because the mind is not only a place of struggle, it is also a meeting place, a sanctuary where God often chooses to speak precisely because it is where you already live. From here, the journey changes direction, not outward, but inward. And as you begin to understand how God communicates through the movements of thought, peace, and clarity within you, you'll start to see that what felt like confusion was actually an invitation to discernment. This is where we begin to uncover the real issue. Not why God doesn't speak, but why His voice is so often mistaken. On the surface, it feels like the problem is silence, like God has gone quiet while you wait, unsure which way to move. But underneath that assumption, something else is happening. The real struggle isn't that God isn't speaking. It's that His voice doesn't arrive the way you were conditioned to expect it. Many people imagine divine guidance as something that interrupts thought, a voice that overrides the mind rather than moves within it. So when guidance shows up gently, clothed in your own inner language, it feels suspicious. You think, if this were God, it would feel different. But what if God never intended to compete with your thoughts, only to shape them? The human mind is always active. Thoughts rise from memory, emotion, fear, desire, habit. And because all of these voices sound familiar, discernment becomes difficult. So the surface issue becomes confusion. Which thoughts are mine? Which are not? Yet the deeper issue is trust. Not trust in God's ability to speak, but trust in the way He chooses to do it. God often speaks in ways that respect your free will, your psychology, your pace. He doesn't force clarity. He invites recognition. And because His guidance often feels calm rather than dramatic, clear rather than chaotic, steady rather than urgent, many people overlook it, assuming divine direction must feel overwhelming to be real. So the mind keeps searching for something louder, while quietly dismissing the very thoughts that carry peace, restraint, wisdom, or unexpected clarity. That's the subtle misunderstanding. God's voice is not always separate from your thinking. Often, it moves through it. And until this is understood, people continue asking the wrong question. Not, is God speaking? But, why doesn't His voice feel external enough for me to trust it? That question sets the stage for what follows. When this misunderstanding lingers, it quietly shapes the way you live. Not in obvious ways, but in subtle patterns that slowly take root. You hesitate longer than necessary because you're afraid of mistaking your own thoughts for God's guidance. You overanalyze simple decisions, waiting for a certainty that never arrives in the form you expect. You ignore gentle inner warnings because they didn't come with fear or urgency, only calm restraint. You feel spiritually disconnected, not because God is distant, but because you've been taught to distrust the very place where He's been speaking. And over time, this creates distance in other areas too. Relationships suffer when forgiveness is delayed. Opportunities pass when clarity is questioned. Peace slips away when calm thoughts are overridden by louder, anxious ones. Inside, something else happens. You begin to doubt your discernment. You second-guess moments of peace. You question whether your faith is working the way it should. And that inner doubt becomes exhausting. Because instead of walking forward with quiet confidence, you live in a loop of spiritual hesitation, constantly waiting for confirmation, constantly afraid of getting it wrong. But beneath all of this is something even deeper, a fear most people never name. Beneath the hesitation, beneath the overthinking, beneath the waiting for something louder, there is a fear that quietly governs it all. Not fear of God, but fear of mishearing Him. A fear that says, what if I trust this thought and it's just me? What if I move forward and I was wrong? What if I call it God's voice and disappoint Him or myself? So you hold back. You delay obedience until certainty feels undeniable. You postpone peace until proof feels airtight. You ask for signs on top of nudges, confirmations on top of clarity, because certainty feels safer than trust. But here's what often goes unseen. This fear doesn't come from rebellion. It comes from reverence. You don't want to misuse God's name. You don't want to spiritualize impulse. You don't want to be led by emotion instead of truth. So you protect yourself by waiting. Yet in that waiting, you unknowingly place distance between yourself and the very intimacy you desire. Because relationship, real relationship, has always required trust before certainty. And this is where the turning point begins. Because God's way of speaking has never been about removing all risk. It has been about cultivating closeness. Which is why discernment doesn't begin with volume. It begins with familiarity. And that truth becomes clear, not through explanation, but through a story. A story that mirrors this fear. A story that reveals how quietly God can move and how powerfully everything can change when someone finally listens. Which is why this story matters. It begins in the quiet hours of the night. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the heavy kind. The kind that settles after the world has gone still, when thoughts grow louder and unanswered questions refuse to sleep. There was a man named Elias. He wasn't remarkable by the world's standards. No title, no platform, no spiritual reputation to protect. Just a man carrying the weight of responsibility, trying to do right, trying to provide, trying to believe that God was near, even when he felt distant. His home was ordinary. Dim hallways, soft shadows on the walls. A house filled with life during the day and worry at night. Elias prayed often, not eloquently, not confidently. He prayed because he didn't know what else to do. He believed in God. That was never the question. The question was whether God believed in him enough to speak. Inside, Elias carried a quiet fear. What if I'm missing something? What if God is speaking and I don't recognize it? So he asked for signs. He waited for certainty. He expected guidance to arrive like an interruption. But nothing ever came that way. Instead, life kept pressing forward. Decisions without clarity, responsibilities without reassurance, love mixed with fear. And though Elias never admitted it aloud, his greatest struggle wasn't doubt. It was exhaustion. The exhaustion of trying to navigate life without knowing whether the voice inside him was wisdom or just worry wearing a softer tone. That night felt no different, until it did. Sleep came slowly to Elias that night, not because his body resisted rest, but because his mind wouldn't loosen its grip. Thoughts drifted in fragments. Concerns about work, unspoken worries about his daughter, that familiar sense of carrying more than he could name. And then, without warning, he woke. No sound broke the silence. No dream lingered. No fear rushed his chest. Just a sudden awareness. A quiet urgency that didn't feel like panic, but didn't feel like imagination either. It wasn't a voice. It didn't echo. It didn't demand. It simply settled inside his mind. Check on your daughter. Elias lay still. He reasoned with it. She was safe. She was old enough. He had already checked earlier. The house was calm, the night unchanged. So he almost dismissed it. But the thought returned. Not louder, deeper. Not anxious, clear. Go to her room. Something about it felt different from worry. Worry rushed. Worry argued. Worry spiraled. This didn't. It waited. Elias stood up. The hallway felt longer than usual. Every step measured. Every breath restrained. When he opened the door, time seemed to pause. His daughter sat on the floor, overwhelmed, shaking, caught in a moment she didn't know how to escape. Elias crossed the room without thinking. He knelt. He held her. Words came later. Tears came first. In that fragile space between silence and catastrophe, a life shifted direction. And as the night slowly returned to stillness, Elias realized something without fully understanding it yet. That single, gentle nudge, that almost ignored thought, had mattered more than anything loud ever could. But the question remained, how did I know? The house eventually fell quiet again. Not the same kind of quiet as before, but a softened one. A silence that had passed through pain and come out holding something sacred. Elias sat alone afterward, replaying the moment in his mind. Not with fear, with wonder. There had been no panic in that thought, no spiral of imagined outcomes, no rush of dread. Only clarity, only timing, only a calm insistence that didn't argue. It guided. And that's when something shifted inside him. For the first time, Elias didn't ask, why didn't God speak louder? He asked something else. What if he already did? And I finally listened. In the days that followed, Elias noticed changes, not around him, but within him. His prayers grew quieter, not because he had less to say, but because he was learning how to listen. He began paying attention to the moments he once dismissed. The pause before reacting, the sudden clarity during confusion, the calm restraint when anger wanted control. He realized something humbling. God hadn't suddenly started speaking. Elias had simply stopped ignoring the whisper. And in that realization was a truth that stayed with him. The most powerful guidance rarely announces itself. It waits to be trusted. Maybe you recognize yourself in Elias. Maybe you've had moments you couldn't explain. Times when a thought arrived without effort, without fear, without noise, and you felt it mattered. Maybe you felt led to pause when you were about to react, to reach out to someone without knowing why, to step away from something that didn't feel right, even when it looked harmless. And maybe you brushed it off. You told yourself it was coincidence, intuition, overthinking, nothing spiritual, because it didn't feel dramatic enough to be divine. But what if those moments weren't random? What if they were invitations you didn't yet trust? Not commands, not pressure, just gentle guidance, offered, not forced. Maybe you've been harder on yourself than necessary, questioning your discernment, doubting your sensitivity, assuming that if God were truly speaking, you'd feel more certain. But familiarity can feel ordinary, and sacred things often arrive quietly. If any part of you feels seen right now, let that be enough. You don't need to decide anything yet. You don't need to label anything. Just notice. And yet, even with that recognition, there is still a struggle. Because part of you wants to trust those gentle movements, and another part of you is afraid of being wrong. You replay moments in your mind. Was that peace from God, or just relief? Was that restraint wisdom, or fear? Was that clarity guidance, or coincidence? So you hesitate. You feel the pull to act, but delay. You sense the nudge, but second-guess it. You feel the calm direction, but ask for something stronger. And in that space, confusion grows. Not because God is unclear, but because trust is costly. Trust asks you to move without full explanation, to obey without applause, to listen without demanding proof. There may be regret there too, moments you wish you had listened sooner, words you wish you had not spoken, opportunities you felt guided toward but didn't take. And that regret doesn't come from condemnation. It comes from desire. The desire to do better next time, to be more attentive, to live with less inner resistance. If you feel that tension, that pull between caution and courage, it doesn't mean you're failing. It means you care. And that care is not a weakness. It's the soil where discernment grows. What if the invitation before you isn't to be certain, but to be available? Not available to every thought, not open to every impulse, but gently open to the ones that carry peace without pressure. Change doesn't begin with confidence. It begins with willingness. A willingness to pause when calm asks you to pause. A willingness to soften when clarity asks you to soften. A willingness to trust that God does not rush you, and therefore does not rush your mind. This isn't about forcing yourself to hear better. It's about creating space to notice more. Space where fear no longer dominates. Space where urgency no longer leads. Space where stillness is not empty, but attentive. You don't have to get this perfect. You don't have to label every thought correctly. You are simply being invited to walk with more awareness than before. And awareness changes everything. Because when you stop demanding that God shout, you begin to recognize the wisdom of His whisper. And that recognition opens a deeper anchor, one that has steadied people long before you and will steady you now. Long before Elias ever learned to trust a whisper, there was another man standing in silence, expecting God to arrive with force. Elijah, a prophet shaped by fire, confrontation, and miracles. A man who had seen the dramatic power of God firsthand. A man who knew what divine interruption looked like. So when he climbed the mountain, he expected the familiar. The ground began to shake. Wind tore through the landscape with violence. Fire roared across the mountain's face. Any one of these could have been enough, but God was not in them. And then, after everything loud had passed, there was something else. Not a command, not a spectacle, not a display of dominance. A whisper. So gentle it required closeness. So quiet it demanded attention. So restrained it could only be heard by someone willing to be still. In that moment, Elijah learned what power truly looks like. God did not need to overpower him to guide him. He simply needed Elijah to lean in. And the same truth echoes through every generation. God often chooses intimacy over intensity, because intensity can impress, but intimacy transforms. What followed that whisper was not instruction overload, not a rush of answers, not a sudden fixing of everything Elijah feared. It was restraint. God did not explain himself. He did not justify his silence. He did not compete with the noise Elijah expected. He waited. Because silence, when chosen by God, is not withdrawal. It is trust. Trust that the whisper was enough. Trust that closeness would do what force never could. Trust that guidance doesn't always need momentum. Sometimes it needs stillness. Elijah covered his face, not in fear, but in reverence. He realized something profound in that moment. God was not absent during the wind, the earthquake, or the fire. He was simply not revealed there. Revelation required quiet. And that restraint, God holding back volume, was not weakness. It was precision. Because only a heart that slows down can hear what is gentle. Only a mind that releases control can recognize guidance that doesn't demand it. This is how God protects relationship. He does not overwhelm, he invites. That mountain moment was never just about Elijah. It was a pattern. A revelation meant to echo forward into every life that would later ask, why doesn't God speak the way I expect him to? Because the same God who chose a whisper over a storm is the God who still chooses closeness over spectacle. What Elias learned in his hallway, what Elijah learned on that mountain, is what you are being invited to understand now. God's guidance is rarely designed to impress others. It is designed to steady you. His whispers do not compete with chaos. They cut through it, quietly. They don't demand trust. They build it. And when you begin to recognize this pattern, your inner world changes. You stop chasing volume. You stop measuring faith by intensity. You stop assuming that calm means nothing is happening. Instead, you begin to notice alignment, peace that carries direction, conviction without condemnation, clarity that doesn't rush you, but readies you. This is not coincidence. It is continuity. The same God, the same method, the same invitation. And once this meaning settles in, the question is no longer whether God speaks through the mind, but how you respond when he does. That response is where practice begins. At this point, something subtle begins to change. Not in your circumstances, but in how you interpret what happens inside you. You start to notice the difference between reaction and wisdom. Reaction is fast, loud, defensive. Wisdom is calm, steady, unhurried. Reaction pushes. Wisdom invites. Reaction says, do something now or you'll lose control. Wisdom says, pause. Clarity is already forming. And slowly, you begin to see it. God's guidance does not compete with anxiety. It replaces it. Not by force, but by presence. This reframing is important. Because hearing God through the mind does not mean every calm thought is divine. And it does not mean every challenging thought is from God either. It means you begin to ask better questions. Does this thought bring peace without avoidance? Does it carry clarity without pressure? Does it align with love, truth, and restraint rather than fear and impulse? You stop asking, "Is this loud enough to be God?" And you begin asking, "Is this wise enough to trust?" That shift from volume to wisdom is where discernment matures. And from here, listening becomes practical, not mystical, not complicated, just practiced. This is where listening becomes lived, not perfect, not dramatic, just honest and intentional. Step 1. Learn the texture of peace. God's guidance often arrives with a calm weight, not excitement, not fear. It doesn't rush you, but it grounds you. Example: you're deciding whether to speak or stay silent. One option feels urgent and emotional. The other feels steady, even if it's harder. Inner question: does this thought settle me or stir me? Step 2. Notice timing, not volume. God's whispers often arrive before chaos, not during it. They prepare you quietly. Example: you feel led to rest, forgive, or pause before anything goes wrong. Inner question: did this thought come with foresight rather than reaction? Step 3. Observe direction, not emotion. God's guidance moves you toward clarity and alignment, not confusion. Example: a thought challenges you, but it doesn't shame you. It corrects without crushing. Inner question: does this lead me toward growth without condemning me? Step 4. Test consistency. God's voice is steady. Fear changes tone. Impulse shifts quickly. Example: a wise thought returns gently over time, even when emotions fluctuate. Inner question: does this guidance remain consistent when I'm calm? Step 5. Practice small trust. Discernment grows through relationship, not perfection. Example: you respond kindly. You pause before reacting. You follow peace in a small decision. Inner question: what would it look like to trust this nudge just this once? None of these steps demand certainty. They invite awareness. And awareness, practiced gently, reshapes how you listen. One truth must be held gently, but firmly. Listening for God's whisper does not mean silencing your own safety. Stillness is not surrender to harm. Peace is not permission for abuse. Trust is not the absence of boundaries. God's guidance never asks you to endure what destroys you. It never calls you to stay where you are diminished, threatened, or violated. And it never confuses love with tolerance of harm. Sometimes wisdom sounds like leave. Sometimes clarity sounds like say no. Sometimes peace arrives as the courage to protect yourself. God's whisper may be gentle, but it is never careless with your well-being. Discernment includes restraint, and restraint includes knowing when silence is not holy, but harmful. You are allowed to step back. You are allowed to seek help. You are allowed to set limits. God's voice will never contradict truth, dignity, or care for your life. And with that grounding in place, you are ready to move toward resolution, not fearfully, but held. Take a slow breath here, not to end the journey, but to rest inside what has already begun. You don't need to reach for anything right now. You don't need to figure everything out. You don't need to replay your past or solve your future. Just notice this. The tension has softened. The pressure has eased. The need for something loud has quieted. And in its place, there is something gentler. A sense of being accompanied rather than examined. Guided rather than rushed. You are not behind. You are not late. You have not missed God's voice. You are learning its tone. And that learning doesn't happen through effort. It happens through presence. Let this moment be what it is. A pause, a settling, a quiet reassurance that you are not alone in your inner world. God has been nearer than you thought, closer than confusion, steadier than fear. And that nearness does not fade when the message ends. It continues in the calm moments, in the small decisions, in the quiet movements of your mind. This is the moment where nothing needs to be forced. No striving to hear better. No pressure to change faster. No demand to become someone else overnight. Just a gentle release. A letting go of the idea that you must control every thought, interpret every signal, prove every nudge before you trust it. Surrender here doesn't mean giving up your mind. It means allowing it to rest, to stop bracing for noise, to stop guarding against silence, to stop assuming that guidance must feel intense to be real. You are allowed to soften your grip, to say quietly within yourself, I don't need to understand everything right now. I don't need to hear perfectly. I only need to stay open. And in that openness, something sacred happens. You stop chasing God's voice and begin walking with it. Not ahead of it, not behind it, but alongside it, in the ordinary flow of thought, choice, and awareness. This is how trust deepens, not in moments of certainty, but in moments of calm surrender. Let this be a quiet prayer, not spoken loudly, not performed, just breathed. God, teach me to recognize you where you already are, not only in answers, but in awareness, not only in certainty, but in peace. Renew my mind, not by force, but by closeness. Calm what rushes, clarify what confuses. Help me trust the wisdom that arrives without fear. Let your whisper become familiar. Let your presence feel near. Let my thoughts learn the sound of your peace. And as you move forward from here, take just one gentle step. Not a vow, not a promise, just an agreement with openness. When a thought rises with calm clarity, notice it. When peace arrives without explanation, honor it. When wisdom speaks softly, don't rush past it. If it feels right, you can seal this moment simply by whispering within yourself, Lord, renew my mind. No pressure, no performance, just consent. Because this is not the end of the message. It is the beginning of a deeper awareness. God has not suddenly started speaking. You have simply learned where He has been all along. And from here forward, you will begin to recognize His whisper in the quiet, steady flow of your own thoughts.